Breaking the gray.
Sarah, we're very close to being in the same time zone, except I took a trip. So now we're not. But we're in the same country, at least.
We're in the same country, yes. There's a disturbance in the force. We're both here on the same place. So
Yeah, rebel scientists everywhere are gathering and ready to make their trip to Mecca in Gilroy, California. But they are coming. Sarah, again, what a great week we've had. I've been spending a lot of time focused on my supplements. I've been spending a lot of time really just getting outside and I feel like I've been trained. So I feel like I'm a Jedi now and using all my biohacking tricks. But today we have a very special guest because I think it touches on something you and I have talked about a lot, which is water. So who's our guest today?
So Michael Hobson, and he's from Aquene Water. I hope I've pronounced that right, Michael. Aquene Water?
Aquene Springs, correct.
Aquene Springs. And of course, this is something that, Russ and I have talked about a lot. I've done a lot of work with structured water and information imprinted water. I'm very interested to hear what you've got to say, Michael. I know that Russ and I are going to try the water this weekend, and we'll probably do a little challenge around that as we do. But maybe you can just introduce yourself because you're one of our rare guests that we haven't met before. So It's very exciting to meet you. Please go ahead and give us a little bit of background.
Oh, thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be here with both of you, talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart, but also so important for all of us. And that's water. And, I won't go into great detail about my background because I don't find it all that interesting, quite frankly, what has come before. It's really for me about what's happening now and what the opportunity is going forward. But suffice it to say that I come from a background as an academic. I was a college professor, and then I went into corporate life and did some interesting things there back then. And then in about 1989, started on the path of serial entrepreneurship. And in the last 33 years now, actually, I've started 11 businesses, and some of which have been great successes, and some of which have been pretty, not spectacular, but kind of fun failures. And so how did I get to water is a question that I get quite often. And the answer is I was guided here, and I don't know any other way than to tell the truth about that. Someone asked me one time about 20 years ago, what's next, right? And I was in the midst of a successful business at that time, maybe the one I'm most well known for, called Classic Records. Anyway, and without thinking, I said, water. I don't know what that means, but water. And then as time went on, it became sort of more open for me to say, I know it's going to have to do with water. I don't know what it is yet. And then finally, at some point, probably 15 years ago or 12 years ago anyway, I reconnected with a friend, and I won't go into the details, but that was the beginning. That was the sign that I needed to start looking into water. And I've spent the last at least 12 years looking very deeply into it. And then the last piece to that story is that I really was guided by, I call them angels, to be honest, people that come into my life for reasons that I don't understand, but end up helping me find. And I was guided to the spring, and it's a very sacred place, and I'll talk more about that. And so here we are.
Wow.
What is it? What is it about water, Michael? Like, what is it that drew you to it? Obviously, there's other things we're going to learn here, but what is it about water that really interested you?
Well, I'll tell you a funny thing, Russ. Before diving in, so to speak, I was never really a big water drinker, right? And so that's the unusual part. It's not like I can say, I've always loved water. I've pursued it. I've been an aficionado of it. I think things that I become involved in, I take to an extreme. That's part of my personality, for probably good and bad. And so when I got down this trail, I realized how, and you all know this, we are by volume 70% water. Molecularly, which is hard to imagine, we're 99.99% water. So I can really say to you truthfully, we are water talking to water right now, right? So, that's how I've realized how crucial it is to really life itself, to be honest. When you think about it, and of course you all know this, you can go about 5 minutes without air. You could go about 3 days without water. You can go well over a month without food. So what's most important here?
Yeah,
right?
For sure. Yeah. So this is a specific spring you're talking about when you're talking about the water. Was that also something that you kind of felt guided to?
Yes, absolutely, Sarah. There's no question that the person that introduced me to the water said, this is something you should look into, wink, wink. And I ended up meeting the gentleman who's now a partner, who's owned the spring for over 30 years. And it turns out that it's a sacred spring known to the Native Americans. And by the way, the Native Americans don't inhabit that part of southern Idaho anymore. Of course, they've been moved a little further south into Arizona and Utah and so forth. But nonetheless, it was known for thousands of years as a place of healing. And in particular, because it's geothermic water, right? So it comes out of the ground naturally at about 80 gallons a minute. So it's like a fire hose, right? 4-inch fire hose at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'll talk more about the importance of that in a few minutes.
And it's in Idaho. Is it near that really beautiful waterfall in Twin Springs?
In Twin Falls.
In Twin Falls. In Twin Falls.
The waterfall on the Snake River, right? The answer is, as the crow flies, it's about 60 miles. But the spring itself is 70 miles from civilization in a very remote area. And I think that's one of the beauties of it, is that it's untouched with regard to any of the things people worry about these days, rightfully so, like runoff. Because Idaho's a big agricultural state, right? Not just potatoes, sugar beets and the like, right? And as you all, I'm sure, have explored and are aware, that modern farming involves effectively, and I'm sorry to say this, but growing crops and chemicals of one variety or another. The soil's almost like a mattress for the chemicals. And so that concern about runoff, particularly into the Snake River, is a big concern. But luckily, this is not, for a couple of other reasons, which I can talk about as well, unaffected by those issues.
Are there other water sources like this that you've found or discovered or heard about that you're wanting to go see? Or is this one unique? And why it sounds like you explained why it's so unique, but are there other areas like Iceland or others that have this geothermal impact?
Russ, great question. And the answer has a couple of prongs to it. One is that if you look at, and I'm sure you all are well aware and probably have explored the blue zones around the world, right? There is at least one thing that all of those blue zones have in common, that the water is very high in silica, okay? And that's one of the features of this water that we can talk in more detail about. So on that level, silica-rich water, yes, there are other places, and those blue zones obviously are linked to increased vitality and longevity, vital longevity, which is even more important. And so, yes, I think there are some related places. I think, and of course, I can't help but say that because I'm involved in it and I'm passionate about it, that there's something extra special about this water. And I can talk about that in a little more detail as well. But there are some other special waters in the world. I think the water from Lourdes, for example, in France, is very special water. I think there are water sources in Italy and other places around the world that are sacred, and there are reasons for that. And we can go into some of that as well. But yeah, I think let's put it this way: there are some places that also have good water. There aren't that many of them, and there are fewer as time goes on, as we know what's happening with the water sources around the world.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I had a look at your website, and some of the things you've got on there, like, it's deuterium depleted water, and it's from a sacred place. I kind of had heard of before, but the silica thing was a little bit new to me. Maybe you could just tell people, first of all, what is silica? It's a mineral, and why is that important?
Yeah, so it makes all the sense in the world once you realize it. Of course, I didn't years ago. So it turns out silica, Si, is in the periodic table, often not found on its own, right? It's one of those elements, like hydrogen, for example, and I'll come back to that in a minute, that doesn't like to, it's kind of a lonely bachelor, if you will. It likes to be paired with something. So hydrogen likes to glom onto other things, right? Like oxygen to make water and carbohydrates and so on and so forth, right? Turns out silica likes to grab onto oxygen as well. Here's a fun fact. The most prevalent element in the Earth's crust, I didn't know this, and it's going to be a surprise, I bet, maybe, is oxygen. Second most prevalent element in the Earth is silica. Third most prevalent, and we can come back to this as well, is aluminum. And it turns out that silica has an affinity for both oxygen and for aluminum. In the case of oxygen, it typically binds to oxygen and makes silica dioxide, right? And that's the form that we most often encounter silica. But it turns out that it also sequesters aluminum. It encoats aluminum and actually helps plants prevent the toxicity that is aluminum in their existence as well, and in animals and humans. And I'll come back to that. But you specifically asked about silica. So it's this wonderful trace mineral that is the basis for, you ready? Hair, skin, bones, teeth, collagen, which is part of our extracellular matrix. It's also important for blood flow. Silica actually embeds into the arteries and veins in our body and helps with blood flow. It's involved in wound healing and as I said, in cardiovascular activities as well. And more recently, as you all are well aware, what we've learned, or what science has learned or is uncovering, is that chronic inflammation, particularly late in life, has a connection to aluminum toxicity, right? And silica, turns out, binds to aluminum, and we, animals and humans, excrete it through sweat. Again, maybe a good reason to exercise and sweat a little bit, or spend some time in an infrared spa. But another fun fact that's not well known, but it's also true, is that as we age, we lose two things, at least two things. One is water, so we become dehydrated over time, and so we look more like raisins than grapes. And we also lose silica. So is it any surprise, and I'm not just suggesting that the loss of silica is the reason for the increase in Alzheimer's and other chronic inflammatory diseases, but given that silica's role in reduction of inflammation in our bodies, it makes some sense that there's correlation. So I'm sorry for the long answer, but
no, it's very interesting. I mean, do you think that's a bioavailable form then, the silicon dioxide? Because obviously it's binding with the oxygen. That's
correct.
Yeah? That
is absolutely correct, which is the reason why you can't just go to the beach and eat sand and get the same result.
Yeah, or hair, or whatever else you said.
Or glass.
Well, we're really changing biohacking. We're suggesting a plate of sand and hair.
Yes.
One thing that Sarah and I have noticed, and Sarah and I have been doing this now for a couple of years, is there is a sense of being extreme biohackers, and that pushing. Quantity is something that is very dangerous in biohacking, because a lot of cases, some people aren't doctors and they're just taking more and more. And I had an experience recently I was telling Sarah about with one of the supplements where I just swelled up like a balloon and I had to get off the supplement because it was just creating a lot of swelling. I couldn't feel my hands and my fingers, which is a little dangerous. I'm wondering here, like, how much do you need and how much do you need to replenish? And I'm sure it's based on size and exercise and things like that. But is there a quantity that is necessary for you? And are there other natural ways to get it?
Yeah. So I think the answer is, unfortunately, it's like a lot of other things. It's hard to know how much calcium one needs and other elements. And so that's, for me anyway, and not being critical, but the supplement world, that's its biggest problem. It's like, how much is enough and how much is too much? Because as at least my perspective is in life, it's balance, right? And so what's the right amount to balance? And I think it's probably a complicated mixture based on, what kind of lifestyle you have, what other kinds of things that you consume. Obviously, there are other sources of silica. And so what are those? The usual suspects, right? Plants and fruits and so forth, because they take up silica when they grow. And if we eat them, then we get bioavailable silica that we can use, in the processes that we just talked about. So unfortunately, the FDA or science hasn't really come up with what the minimum recommended daily amount is or where you should be. And it might be that it's just hard to know that, right? So I wish I could say, I think that drinking water that's silica rich is a very direct way to get it. There are also silica supplements, and it's in the form of silica dioxide. You can buy on Amazon or other places, bottles of silica dioxide. You can, make your own little witch's brew, if you will, and, put that with normal water. So I think that's kind of the best answer that I can give you to that question. I wish we knew more. I don't think, to your point, though, that you can overdo silica. It's one of those things like kind of vitamin C-ish, if you will. And I don't know this with certainty. We haven't done any studies, but I don't think we can get to the point where it's like we've got too much and it goes away. Like I said, we excrete it when we sweat, often bonded to aluminum, which is a great way for us to keep ourselves detoxed from aluminum toxicity. And remember, aluminum's everywhere. It's in the air, right? It's in all foodstuffs. It's in plants because it's the third most prevalent element in the Earth's crust. So
yeah, and it's associated with the plaques and tangles of Alzheimer's, isn't it? I mean, we don't actually know if that's causal. It's another good reason not to wear your deodorant, isn't it? Because one, the deodorant's got aluminium in it, and secondly, like you're saying, you can excrete it if you're not blocking that pathway.
I can thank you for my smell, Sarah.
Yeah, I don't. I'm here on my own. Nobody cares.
But it is something that you can get. There is a lot of fear in some of this. Of now, and I'm not a doctor, but I think the more I know, I know there's a famous saying that the more I know, the more naive I become. There's something about like believing that I'm an expert, but I'm no expert. But the curiosity around water, I have a great curiosity around water. Sarah and I have talked about structured water a lot and about water having memory and about it storing and it being structured. So can we talk a little bit about that? Because I am incredibly fascinated about water. And we've already spent hours talking about this, not on our podcast, but I'm so just obsessed with it.
Absolutely. So we're going to venture into an area that is controversial, right? And that's the area of water memory, and I think that I have an explanation, at least in part, about how that can work. Since we are all water, it makes some sense that there's something to do with our memory, probably, or our ability to process or communicate that has to do with water and its ability to hold vibratory information. And so it turns out that silica as you may know, is the basis for quartz. And what do we know about quartz? Quartz is the basis for radios, quartz oscillators. It's the basis for a whole part of the industry of healing that has to do with crystals and their vibratory patterns, and the use on the body, and in health and healing. And so it turns out that this water, rich in silica, and I'm going to show you something that you're probably not ready for, but that's what happens in these things where you take it in a direction that I hadn't anticipated that you were going to go. So it turns out that in addition to the boxes of water, which we can talk about are incredibly carbon friendly compared to other ways of delivering fluids generally, but water specifically, we have bottles now. And the bottle, I don't know if you can see it, it says crystal source water, and it says naturally programmable drinking
Yes,
water.
yeah.
So how would this be programmable? Well, let's take a look. I don't know, can you guys see the silica crystals? Let's see.
No, I don't think I can see the crystals in there.
Yeah, they're there. It's a matter of the focus
Right.
of the camera. I'm putting some light in the bottom, which excites them. They like light. I got another version that's maybe a little easier to see. This is a version that, you know what? Let me do this. Let me try another light source. It's about seeing it in the light.
And what we're expecting to see, Michael, we're going to see the small crystals of the silica, right?
Silica crystals. I mean, real silica crystals, like it's crystallized,
right?
In an absolutely beautiful fashion.
Yeah, I think I can see some sparkles in that.
Well, there you go.
Yes, I can now. Yeah, so we're seeing the water, and it has really got like little flecks, shiny flecks in it. Yeah, we can see that now.
And notice that it's not random. Notice that there's a helical nature to this.
Right. Yeah.
So the water is filled with silica, the basis for quartz, which holds vibratory information. And so you can program your own water. And what is our voice? Our voice is an acoustic version of our thoughts. And when we speak, the water can hold that intention. We can hold the water and we can speak to it. And we can biohack ourselves. How cool is that?
Yeah, that's very cool. I interviewed Masaru Emoto, who did some stuff about imprinting messages in water. Although I must admit, I did some experiments with him because he had a lab in Liechtenstein in Europe. And I was looking at that. And I think there was definitely, you can't really separate the observer from the experiment in that case. And I saw slightly different results than their researchers did. So that was interesting. But then I also went and saw Luc Montagnier, who was doing the experiment where he was doing exactly what you were saying. His setup was actually a microphone.
Yeah, exactly.
But he wasn't recording sound. He was recording the frequency that comes off of DNA.
That's correct.
Which is, another kind of level of like trying to get your head around that, because you're not only talking about a vibration from sound waves. He's actually measuring the electromagnetic field from certain molecules. But certainly this is the theory, isn't it? That by changing the electromagnetic field, or some kind of field, might not be electromagnetic, around water then shapes itself and carries the memory of that water. It's also Mei Wan Ho's work. Yeah, she also did some stuff about that.
It changes its structure. And, I knew Luc Montagnier for the last, 6 or 7 years before he passed. And I spent quite a lot of time with him. In fact, visited him many times in Paris at his place there. And I knew Mei Wan Ho as well. And also, I'm a good friend of Gerald Pollack, if you know about
Yes, I went to Jerry Pollock's lab too. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure, because it's so interesting. And Jerry Pollock, for people who don't know, has written this fabulous book called Fourth Phase Water.
Fourth Phase Water.
And that really does detail this whole thing about structuring the water, and kind of explains how water itself is a crystalline structure. But that's why I'm interested. What do you think the silica adds to that? Because water is crystalline in itself.
Yes. So I think, and I want to back up just a minute to your experience with Emoto. Keep in mind that Emoto was using purified water, so water with no elements in it, right? And a lot of experiments around water are done in that context because, you know, they want to rule out on some level that, it's the other stuff in there that matters. And I think the other stuff does matter, right? So the trace minerals and so forth, I think that's one of the reasons why spring water, with mineralized spring water, and again, too much is too much, but just enough, is a good thing. Talking about what Jerry would call interfacial water, right, where water at a boundary changes its structure, and that's the reason that water is such a miracle molecule, I think, is that around proteins and around strands of DNA, it changes its structure, right? And it facilitates, from my standpoint, from what I understand of it, the ability for the cell to communicate both intra-cell, right, between organelles in the cell, but also the water outside the cells is a pathway, a conductive pathway, both electrically and photonically. And so it makes some sense that if you have a crystalline rich body, including silica, that can increase the ability for cells to communicate with each other, and take that away, inhibit that ability in a way that takes away from our vitality. I just wanted to say one last thing, and that is that there is, Jerry talks about EZ water, exclusion zone water, which is highly structured water at an interface, right? So it turns out that there's a measurement of structured water, and it is the absorption of the water in the about 2.7 micron range, which is in the infrared range, if you're interested. And it turns out there's an interesting fact, and that is that DNA and proteins absorb light in that same part of the UV spectrum, in the 2.4 to 2.7 nanometers range. So when you find a structured water that absorbs in that range as well, and by the way, the absorption of light is important for life, then you're onto something. So it turns out that we've sent the Aquene Springs water up to the Pollock lab, this is a couple of years ago, and they tested it using this methodology, and lo and behold, it absorbs light in that 2.7 nanometer range, which is the same as DNA. Okay?
Yes. Well, yeah, you're preaching to the choir a little bit here, Michael, because, my whole thing is really about utilizing light to affect people. But I think the main way that it is working is actually via the water. And especially now, there's some amazing results coming out for brain health and brain illness usually using light in the red to near infrared range. But I understand what you're saying about the UV range, because actually, when you shine red and near infrared light, mitochondria then release UV light. That light goes through its conversion there. So
Absolutely.
Having the correct water surrounding your proteins on your membranes in the cell, this is where it could be the crucial piece for really how light works on the body. So
I think it is.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's a piece that for some reason is not so mainstream right now because it's difficult to measure. It's a little bit controversial, and it involves people looking at biology from a physics point of view rather than a biology point of view. And I think we're a little bit stuck in that chemical viewpoint because of, where we are with pharmaceuticals right now?
I think the outcome of all of this stuff, and by the way, I think the outcome of meditation is chemical, right? The outcome of our thoughts is chemical in nature. And that's the ability. So we have that ability to intercede. And that's, of course, what pharmaceuticals are attempting to do. And I won't veer into that discussion. But I'll just say that light, I think, is really important. But to be honest with you, another thing that probably won't be that controversial with you all, but is with a lot of people, is that I think our thoughts are the really crucial thing in terms of our health, well-being, and longevity, and our ability to control those and to speak them and then to drink that intention, I think is the way forward. I think 10 years from now, we're going to be further into the Aquarian age, and it's really about taking personal responsibility as opposed to advocating that responsibility for our health and well-being to others. And, you guys are leading the charge.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's something interesting about water, and I'm going to be asking this from such a newbie point of view. I am not an expert here, but what happens with heat? What happens when you heat silica? What happens when you freeze it? And does something change? And things like global warming, things like rising sea levels, things that like cause water to structurally change. Does heat or cold have an impact on the silica in the water?
So I have to tell you something, Russ. I'm not trying to, compliment you here, but you've asked a question which I don't think you realize the significance of.
That's usually my part here, Michael. That's the part I play.
Yeah.
You're doing really well at that. At the end of that question is, what effect does heat have on silica? Well, it gives me the opportunity to explain to you one of the other features about this water that's pretty special. We think all indications are that this water is what's referred to as primary water. I don't know if you've come across that concept before. It's water that's made in the Earth's crust. So remember prior discussion about the number one element being oxygen, two being silica, right? Also in the Earth's crust, we know that there are hydrocarbons. Now, most often we pump those out and use them in our cars. Less so maybe these days, hopefully over time. But in the presence of heat in geothermic areas, which is where this water comes from, hydrocarbons get broken up by heat, right? So heat is a way of dissociating molecules, right, that have been bound together. So in this case, hydrogen gets dissociated from carbon, right, in a hydrocarbon form. And that hydrogen, as I mentioned before, is not a happy bachelor, right? And the reason I call it a bachelor as opposed to a bachelorette is because it's positively charged. And I don't mean positive to be in a good way versus negative, just that electrically it's positively charged. And so it's looking for a partner, and oxygen is a willing participant. And so they bind together in a situation of heat and make steam. And that steam works its way through the crust, picking up trace minerals, most importantly, I think, silica, and then comes out of the ground at 140 degrees Fahrenheit at this sacred spring. So the answer is that heat's important in the molecular composition of this water. The reason I say you asked a question that's even more fundamental is because lately I've put a lot of thought into and I'm investigating exactly what is heat. We don't really know. We know how it works, but we don't know what it is and what its role is. And so that's a fascinating thing to me. Why is it, for example, that our bodies operate plus or minus 5 or 6 degrees around 98.6? Heat's important, right? Mm-hmm. We absorb and weekly emit at about 3 microns, which is in the infrared range. Why are infrared spas good for us? No surprise. Why is sunlight important to us? No surprise, right? So that the heat is really at the key.
Yeah, I think people forget that heat and light kind of go together. Once you get up into that near infrared range, what we call light turns into heat. It's just semantics on our part because we need to label it as such. But what you're really talking about is infrared.
And water has to be involved in that. It has to be water taking any surprise that water is a great heat sink.
Yes. Yeah.
Should it be? So
awesome. So
yeah, that's very cool.
Sarah, did you have another question? Because I
have loads of questions, but you go, Russ, because we're running out of time and we haven't got to deuterium depletion.
Keep going, because I was going to wrap up, but I know that we're incredibly fascinated by this, Michael, and I know I am for sure. And Sarah's been studying it her whole life, so
I think maybe we should come and do another one on the whole deuterium depletion, because that's not something that you can really explain in a couple of minutes, and that's a topic to itself. I think maybe we should wrap up on what you were saying about your thoughts and how, you can express those. Yeah. What exactly is your process for doing that? Because Russ and I have got some of this water. We're going to meet up at the weekend.
Yeah.
Let's have something practical that we can end on in a tip for our listeners.
I'll just show you, so I have the belief that water has its own level of consciousness. It knows why it's here. And particularly this water is maybe a little more informed than others. But,
I love that.
This is a form of decree for me, and I'll just share it with you all. You can do it literally from my perspective. There are no limits. So you can manifest, right? If the future and the present are the same, and we can switch from one path to another, depending on how devout our thoughts are, if you will. Then, for example, I'll tell you one of the things that I do. I say to the water, and this has got water in it. So I say, water, I'm filled with love for myself and my family and the world. Water, I'm filled with love for myself, my family, and the world. And I say, I'm kind of ceremonial about it. I do it about 9 times. And then at the end I say, and so it is. So I lock that intention into place. And all during that process, in my mind, I'm visualizing myself with a giant smile on my face. I'm visualizing my family members. I'm visualizing people that are controversial in the world that some people hold hard feelings towards. And there are some obvious candidates. All you have to do is look on the front page of the newspaper. I won't mention them by name, but those are the people also that I'm putting that intention in my heart, our most important, organ from my perspective in our body. And remember, silica is also really good for heart function. So that's part of what I do. And then I drink the water.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's as easy as that. All right. Well, we'll definitely rise to that challenge. I mean, I think that's a lovely message to end on, because we can go into a lot of the chemistry and, like I say, there's a lot of stuff about deuterium that we'll maybe do next time. But actually, it's this fundamental message that water kind of holds information, and that not only that, but it's part of us, and we kind of can communicate on some level. And I love the idea of water as a consciousness, because I think this whole panpsychism thing, everything has some level of consciousness, that the more you sort of go down that rabbit hole, the more it makes sense, certainly to me. So, and I love it that you said your water's a little bit more informed than most. That's fabulous. Fabulous.
But at the end of the day, I want to leave you with one thought, and this is really important to me. And that is, ultimately, from my standpoint, it's all up to you. And I mean that from a personal standpoint. When I say about myself, it's all up to me. It's all up to you. And so it comes from me. And if I speak from my heart, and that's the other thing I just want to mention, is that when I speak from my mind through my heart, or my consciousness. I say mind, but it's not really here. I think it's out there. But anyway, and that's the sincerity of through the heart. And so it is.
I love that. And to find your water, it's Aquene Springs. So it's AQUENE Springs.com. We'll have the link up on our rebelscientist.com website as well. And we'll put everything up on our Instagram and social media. We're incredibly grateful for your time. I too would love to spend the rest of my living days teaching empathy, and that we all should try our best to have some empathy for those around us. It's hard. It's so hard. You're consumed by yourself. You're staring at yourself in the mirror all day long. But I'm kind of sick of myself. I want to share a little bit and do a little bit more for others. I think it's kindness that wins all this.
Yeah, Russ, so well put. Thank you. Because it really is about us looking after each other, right?
Yeah.
Put the mask on yourself first, but there are others to be looked after.
Yeah, what a fabulous message. Well, thank you so much again then, Michael. Sorry we kind of dragged you off your mountaintop today to come and speak to us. That's very kind of you to participate. And yeah, we will definitely be drinking your water. And when we do it, we'll be thinking of you and we'll kind of take that joy with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Rebel Scientist podcast. If you know someone who would benefit from the topics in this episode, share it with them. Feel free to DM us on all social media channels or email us at sarah@rebelscientist.com. We read and reply to all messages. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you're listening on a channel that allows reviews such as iTunes, please leave us a fantastic review. We value your support. It all helps. All opinions of our guests are their own opinions and do not necessarily reflect their views of Sarah Turner or Russ Eisenman. This is not medical advice. If you have a health problem, please seek a medical professional.
The Rebel Scientist podcast is a Breaking the Gray production, hosted by Sarah Turner and Russ Eisenman. Audio production by Dave Visaya and the podcast engineers. For more information and for our biohacking shopping guide, visit rebelscientist.com. To hear more incredible Breaking the Gray production podcasts, visit breakingthegray.com. That's gray with an E. breakingthegray.com.
Breaking the gray.